Hello everybody, it's Haj here. In this video, I will compare three wildlife super telephoto zoom lenses. The Tamron 150 to 600 millimeters G2 version, the Nikon 200 to 500 millimeters f-mount lens, and the new 180 to 600 millimeters Nikon Z-mount lens. This is not a spec comparison. My wife and I own the lenses, and I will talk about our user experience instead. We already spent lots of time with the Tamron lens and the Nikon 200 to 500 millimeter lens. The Nikon 180 to 600 millimeters, on the other hand, I just received my copy not long ago. If you just want to know which one to buy without listening to the pros and cons, then my recommendation is to get the 200 to 500 millimeters old lens. It might be surprising or shocking, but I think the Nikon 200 to 500 millimeters is still unbeatable when it comes to quality and price. Just make sure that you get actually a good copy. And if the old 200 to 500 millimeters is not good enough for you, then I would say none of those three lenses will actually satisfy your need. That might sound weird, knowing I was quite excited about this new lens from Nikon. And it is also considered to be the most anticipated lens from the Z-mount. But stick around and I will explain how I ended up with such conclusion. Also, at the end of this video, I will talk about a better alternative. Before we jump to the pros and cons of each lens, just for the information, I used the Tamron 150 to 600 millimeters on a Canon 5D Mark IV camera. I'm a Nikon user and my wife uses Canon. It makes life easier because I do not get tempted stealing my wife's lenses. The two Nikon lenses, on the other hand, I use them on my Z9 and my Nikon D850 camera. I will not talk about the spec sheets of the three lenses, but if you are interested, here is a table summarizing what I think is important to know. Those super telephoto zoom lenses are popular among wildlife photographers. However, don't get me wrong, they will not replace a fast super telephoto prime lens. Do not get too hung up on background blur though. At such focal length, the blurriness of the background is actually defined mainly by your composition and your position relative to the subject and the background. And even, for example, a 400 millimeters 2.8 will not help if your subject is actually sitting right in front of a messy background. The main drawback of a slow aperture lens is, of course, speed. To keep the shutter speed high enough, sometimes the ISO goes too far up. I was using this new 180 to 600 millimeters lens trying to photograph a small songbird in a little piece of forest the other day. And it was a gloomy winter, but it's not the rainforest. But still, I ended up using ISO 6400 in order to get a reasonable shutter speed for moving small songbirds. With an f4 lens, that ISO will then gonna go down to 2500. You might say, well, 6400 ISO is not that bad because you have a good camera and a good denoising software. But I tell you, the difference between photo taken at 2500 ISO versus a photo taken at 6400 ISO will still be there. The things that we cannot fix in post, on the other hand, is a completely blurred shot because of a slow shutter speed. Remember, vibration reduction stabilizes your camera. It does not cancel or reduce the movement of your subject. Let's say you do not want to boost the ISO and the f6.4 lens exposes the shot properly at, let's say, a shutter speed of 1 per 500th of a second. For me, that is only good enough for freezing the action of big birds or mammals, for example. In the same situation, if I have an f4 lens, the f4 lens will allow a shutter speed of 1 per 1250th of a second. And that is actually good enough for freezing the action of a small songbird. However, what those super zoom lens lack, actually, they catch up with their focal length flexibility, their smaller size, their lightweight, and also their affordable price. Among the three super zoom lens that I'm comparing here, the Tamron lens is the lightest of all and has the widest focal length. It goes from 150 to 600 millimeters. It has also an Arca Swiss compatible tripod foot mount. However, it's quite soft wide open at 600 millimeters. I'm not really a sharpness freak, but the lens is just too soft for my liking, even at f8. And because I photograph mainly small birds, I want to use the longest focal length available. The Nikon 200 to 500 millimeters, on the other hand, is already very sharp, wide open. I think it is the best value for the money, and it is also future-proof. Although it seems like Nikon already killed its DSLR lineup, we don't know what Nikon will actually tweak in their new future mirrorless camera. And that might actually render adapted third-party lenses useless. However, among the three lenses that I have here, the Nikon 200 to 500 millimeters is the heaviest, has the narrowest zoom range, 200 to 500 millimeters, and also then have the shortest long focal length. Another problem I have with this lens is the long zoom throw as well. It's a pain actually to zoom from 200 to 500 millimeters. However, because I shoot mainly at 500 millimeters, I can still kind of live with it. Another problem with this lens is actually the lens color. I don't know why, but Nikon just refused to make a lens color Arca Swiss compatible. Be very careful if you are carrying this lens on a tripod or monopod over your shoulder, because the weight of the lens and the camera tends to rotate and to unscrew the lens off the tripod or the monopod. And finally, just like the Tamron lens, again, when using it on a tripod, the lens has to be rebalanced every time you zoom in or you zoom out. The Nikon 180 to 600 millimeters kept the advantage of its older brother and also address some of the disadvantages that I mentioned before. The lens is, for example, already very sharp, wide open, although I do not really see a noticeable difference between the two Nikon lens here. Especially once I stop down the 200 to 500 millimeters at 6.3. But maybe I just have a very good copy of the older lens. In terms of autofocus, the new lens actually acquired the subject quicker and also tracks the subject better than its older brother. However, the 200 to 500 millimeters is not a sloth either. The field where the new lens really shine is actually handheld video. The vibration reduction in this lens is just amazing. The first obvious downside of the new lens is the €2,000 price tag. But it's a new lens. We cannot really compare it with the used price of the two other lenses that I have here. The price of the new lens can get relatively high if you plan to get a teleconverter with it, because the Z-mount teleconverter are still very expensive, and this will be then the only lens that I have which is compatible with that teleconverter, and that will set the price to €2,560. A used F-mount teleconverter can be bought for only €150, and I can use it with all my other lenses. Also, the Z9 camera actually works really well with the F-mount teleconverters. I made a video about using an F-mount teleconverter on a Z9 camera. If you are interested, have a look at it in the link below. The second thing that annoyed me most with the new lens is actually the position of this second lens ring. It sits actually right on my hand when I'm using the lens, and then I ended up activating the manual focus and the focus speaking all the time. I ended up just disabling it altogether, but I could imagine how frustrating it will be not to have actually a manual focus override while photographing, for example, a waterfall between reeds. And finally, as I mentioned before, Nikon just do not make the lens color Arca Swiss compatible. Fortunately though, we don't need to worry anymore about carrying the lens over our shoulder on a tripod or monopod, because now the lens foot had two threads for attaching the lens plate. Given all those cons and pros of each of the lenses that I have here, I would recommend the 200 to 500 millimeters old lens. It is still, I think, in my opinion, the best value for the money. It's a very good lens. Just make sure that you got a good copy. I will pass on the Tamron because of the softness at the longer focal length, but also for future proofing. If you already have a good copy of the 200 to 500 millimeter lens and then use it with an FTZ adapter on a Z camera or with a DSLR camera, and you also do not do much handheld video, then I think it is not a must to upgrade. If you only want a Z-mount, a super telephoto, a zoom lens, then your only choice is then the 180 to 600 millimeters. If weight is your big concern, then again, none of those lenses that I have here are for you. There are other lighter alternatives out there. Same thing, if fast action is your thing, then I think none of those three lenses are for you, because while the autofocus of the new Nikon 180 to 600 millimeters is actually quite fast for action photography, I think the aperture is just too slow if there is not plenty of light, which is anyway the case in most wildlife photography situation. In addition, keep in mind that the lens will perform best with a high-end mirrorless camera like the Z9 or the Z8. So if you do not have the Z9 or the Z8 yet, and then be prepared then also to add another 4,000 or 6,000 euros in your budget. With that money, I would rather get a used D850 or a used D500 with battery grip and a used 500 millimeters f4 like this one, or a 300 millimeters 2.8 like this one. For fast action, even if you already have a Z9 or a Z8, I would still recommend getting a used 500 millimeters f4 instead of this 180 to 600 millimeter lens. Put, for example, a 150 euro 1.4 f-mount teleconverter on it, and you have a very usable 720 f5.6 lens. And if you want to know more about how good those 500 millimeters f4 and 300 millimeters 2.8 lens are, then check out the review at, for example, Photography Life or other review site or YouTube out there. I hope this video helps you decide which lens to add to your kit, and that's it for this video. Until next time then, bye!